In this video, I want to talk about the changes to builds with a 1.4 patch in Biomutant. People have been asking me in the comments of the patch notes, like, how does this affect Deadeyes? How does it affect Psi-Freaks, melee builds, etc., hybrid builds? What does this mean for luck, etc.? So in this video, I just kind of want to cover how those builds have been affected by this update. Note that this does not yet apply to you if you're on console because the patch has not yet arrived for console. THQ is not given an exact release date for this on console, but it will apply to you once this patch is applied. So the first thing I want to take a look at here is Psi-Freaks, or characters that use biogenetics and psi powers to deal the bulk of their damage. The bug that was preventing these from being able to critical hit has now been fixed, so these powers can indeed critically strike. So what this means for these builds now is that critical chance plays a huge role in their damage. The higher critical chance you have, the more likely you are to crit. So you want to focus a bit on critical chance as well. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is still to focus on this through equipment. So what this means is that you would still pump intellect in order to get more psi power damage, and you would focus primarily on doing that while focusing on your gear in order to get your crit chance. Now, one thing to note about gear is that add-ons that provided critical chance have been nerfed significantly, like tons. Like some that used to provide an extra 12% crit chance now provide like 1%. So if you think that you can just hit 100% crit chance like you used to using add-ons, you're not going to be able to do this very easily at all. It's going to take a lot more work. But one thing I do want to note here is that equipment that provides critical chance natively hasn't been nerfed. So there are like shoulder pads in the game that give you 16% critical strike. There's helmets in the game that give you 12%, chests and legs that give you like 6 or 12%. I'm not exactly sure what the highest I've seen, maybe 8%. So adding all these things together, you can still hit around 60 to 70% crit chance before adding add-ons that add like 1 or 2% each. So I think you can totally, in total without doing any luck, probably end up somewhere around 80% crit chance by the time you hit level 30 or 40. Obviously, RNG is going to play a role in what sort of gear you get, but another thing to keep in mind is that as a Psi-Freak build, you do need energy and energy regen too, and a lot of gear that has high crit chance on it doesn't have a lot of energy or energy regen, or sometimes it's randomized which stats exactly they have. So you're going to want to pay attention and make sure you're not just sacrificing all of your energy and energy regen for crit chance, and maybe try and find a happy medium. That means that if you're probably realistically taking gear that has good crit chance, but also taking gear that has good energy and energy regen, you might end up somewhere around 60 to 70% if you're not just going balls to the wall crit. Which means that a few points in luck probably won't hurt your build, but you should probably still focus completely on intellect or almost entirely on intellect in order to get maximum damage. Another thing I want to mention for intellect builds that I forgot to mention in my Psi-Freak guide is that the blaze gloves you can get, while actually reducing your unarmed damage as a whole, if you're trying to use them to play unarmed, they actually increase your psi power damage significantly, about 20% in my testing. So if you're looking for a good way to increase your intellect damage, this is a good way. This is the only piece of equipment that I've found in game that increases your psi power damage, and it can boost it like about 20%, which is a lot. So consider getting this whether you're playing a hybrid build or whether you're playing a pure Psi-Freak build. You can get these from Boom by doing his questline. Next, I want to talk about Deadeyes. Deadeyes were nerfed pretty significantly in this patch because they reduced Sharpshooter from 2 times the multiplier to 1.25 times. So they lost quite a bit of damage with two-handed weapons here, or two-handed ranged weapons. So that's a pretty big hit. Additionally, with the, removal of the critical chance or drastic reduction to critical chance on add-ons on gear, it's going to take them a lot longer to hit 100% critical chance. So they probably got hit harder than just about anyone in this update. Also, what this means is that luck is even more important to the Deadeye now because of the fact that you're not going to get as much crit from gear. So in order to get 100% crit chance faster and earlier in the game so you can become powerful quicker, you're still going to want to pump luck. One thing I do want to mention about Deadeyes, though, is even though they were nerfed, they still deal significant damage and, in my opinion, become as powerful or almost as powerful as mage builds in the long run, particularly if you go to NG+. When you get into NG+, you can take the perks of other classes now, so you can take those from Commando that increase range damage by 10% and increased range critical chance or critical damage by 10%. So that makes up for some of that damage that you lost if you go to NG+. It's obviously not going to apply to you if you're in NG, but you still deal significant damage even on extreme difficulty as a Deadeye. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to play my Deadeye build now, it's not as good, they nerfed it. Let me tell you, you still deal tons of damage, and it's still super easy to play, even on the hardest difficulty, which is now extreme. Moving along to Mercenary builds or melee builds in the game, Saboteurs, Sentinels, etc. These are actually buffed. The base damage for melee weapons was actually increased, so they do more damage than they did before, including add-ons. So if you were playing more before as a melee, you should deal more damage even if you didn't change anything with your build. Now, one thing that hurt them a little bit is the fact that the critical chance on gear, as I mentioned a couple times already, has been nerfed as far as add-ons go. So the crit chance on these builds is going to go down. Previously, what you were doing was pumping strength and getting like really high damage with the overpowered trait in order to deal tons of damage, and then getting all this crit from your gear, hitting 100% crit chance. So every swing you did critted, even though you're at max strength. That crit chance is going to go down from about 100% to maybe 60 or 70% throughout the course of the game, which is still fairly high. But you are going to struggle with critical chance early on in the game when you don't have access to some of these like shoulder pieces or chest pieces or head pieces that have high critical chance on them. Before you've acquired these, your crit chance is going to be rather low. And much like Psi-Freaks, that means that you can put some points into luck if you want to increase your crit chance. This also helps your loot chance, which helps you get better gear. So there is probably a case here to put some points in luck, but you're not going to want to go crazy with it because of the overpowered trait. You're going to get an extra 2% melee damage every time you add strength on top of the damage you get from just putting points into strength. So I feel like you still want to focus primarily on strength here. One thing also I want to mention about melee builds, I forgot to mention in my other video about melee builds, is that the prosthetics you can gain from the Moog questline actually increase your damage with melee weapons significantly, as well as unarmed, not just unarmed. So if you want to find a way to increase your melee damage with gear, this is a huge boost. I think it's somewhere around 20% roughly that increases your melee damage, which is a lot. The last thing I want to talk about here is hybrid builds. Because Psi powers can now crit, that means that critical chance is good for ranged melee and Psi builds, and by extension, this means that luck is good for any of those builds because it increases critical chance. So the best way, or one of the best ways to increase your damage with all types of damage you're going to deal is via luck or critical chance. Because you can't put points into luck during character creation, you're going to have to decide primarily whether you want to put them into strength, so you're playing some sort of melee hybrid, or you want to put them into intellect, so you want to be some sort of Psi power hybrid. In either of these cases, you would essentially be a melee ranged hybrid or a Psi power ranged hybrid. If you wanted to do some sort of tri-hybrid where you're doing all three of these things, what I would recommend doing is just leaving your points in the middle during character creation and pumping luck early on in the game, probably around 100 or 200 or something like that, and trying to get to NG plus as quick as you can, because in NG plus, you're going to get perks that are going to affect melee, ranged, and Psi powers if you didn't start as a Psi-Freak, in order to expand the damage via perks for all of these things. So you could probably go something like 250 strength, 250 intellect, and 250 luck for this sort of build by the end of the game by 50, but I do recommend going to NG plus if you want to do that as quick as you can, because those perks are really going to benefit all three of those playstyles. So that's kind of where builds sit right now with the 1.4 patch, to give you an idea of ranged melee and Psi builds. For the most part, they're stronger. Obviously, ranged is a little bit weaker, but because of the changes in NG plus, if you're playing a ranged build in NG plus, you should see somewhat similar damage to what you were seeing before. Also, I just want to say that I feel like playing hybrid builds is kind of where it's at in this game. You get a taste of everything. And you don't always have to just melee over and over and over again, or ranged over and over again, or just spam your spark ball over and over again. Being able to have flexibility is great, and because of this, Psi powers being able to crit now, you have a lot more flexibility. So keep in mind that crit chance is really the way to go if you want to play hybrid, and I highly recommend it because I feel like it's more fun being able to mix up combat.